Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be with you today. And I already heard and saw on the program that you had already interesting insights into intersectionality. And yeah, let's hope that it will be also interesting right now for everybody. So gender and diversity, nightmare or dream team? At the beginning, gender and diversity are constructs and research objects, and as such, they are associated with struggles for interpretation. There is a politics of narratives. That means that when and who talks about gender and diversity and how is political. It's not neutral. The talking about it is associated with certain positionings. This means politics is also made with a relationship of gender and diversity. And this also means that I cannot speak in a neutral way to you today about it. I'm influenced by my academic teacher, Gertrude Krell, who has taken a certain position on this. We are both influenced by our discipline, business administration. And I'm also influenced by my professional experience in the field of gender studies and as a gender research and gender equality player in Berlin's higher education area. And also, of course, by the fact that I'm a white, middle-class, cis woman born in Berlin. Briefly on this metaphor, nightmare or dream team. When I think about the relationship between gender and diversity, the very first thing that comes to my mind, and probably forever will come to my mind, is the nightmare and dream team couple metaphor. With this metaphor, I go back to 2006, so quite some time. At that time, a conference was held at Freie Universität Berlin, and one of my colleagues then came up with this title. The conference was called Gender and Diversity, Nightmare or Dream Team, and it was about discussing how to relate the diversity concept to already existing gender equality policies. As we can see, this discussion is by no means finished, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. By the way, the title expresses quite well what was thought about the relationship of the two constructs at that time, and maybe, and I would say probably still today. There were and there are still polarized positions and fierce arguments. What is very important for me when I talk about gender and diversity here to you today, I make an analytical distinction. Because basically it is and has always been the case, gender is an aspect of diversity and diversity is an aspect of gender, which is close to the idea of intersectionality, which you discussed before. So now I come to why it is important to talk about gender and diversity in organizations in the first place. I mean, I'm from organization studies, so it's probably not strange that I talk about this. In organization, it's always about majorities and minorities. That means about social relations. In organizations, there were always dominant and marginalized groups in society and in its organizations. The dominant group has a disproportionate amount of power and influence, as Loden and Rosner called it already in '91. And this dominant group, controls organizational resources and perceives itself as normal. Beyond this homogeneous ideal, the others are perceived as deficient, deviant, special. Organizations that are strongly influenced by the dominant group, and that are many, I can tell you, especially scientific organizations, are called monocultural organizations. This is also a quote from Cox from 1991, which is quite a time ago, but still valid in this field. Individuals are always members of several social groups. Of course, individuals are carriers of several characteristics, mechanisms, and phenomena which are related to what has just been described, to the minority, majority distinction, and to the individuals which are being which carry different characteristics, are social closure, exclusion, and stigmatization, glass ceiling, distinction, stereotyping, tokenism, discriminations, all things we do not want to have in organizations. We sometimes hear phrases like gender doesn't matter anymore, or we don't care what color someone's skin has, or something like that. So statements that fall in the category of I don't see gender, I don't see skin color. To this, I would say the only thing that is not seen or does not want to be seen here is disadvantage and discrimination. And here I come back to the dominant group and the homogeneous ideal. So if a person, for example, a heterosexual, cisgender, white male, middle-aged, non-disabled, then chances are high that this person has very little experience with disadvantage and discrimination. I would like to say something briefly about gender and organizational research, because the research on organizations is reflected in organizations and vice versa. I think it is important because we talk so much about organizations here, and because gender in organizational research is not a matter of course. What we've seen so far is quite important, which is that organizations are what we might call inequality regimes. But let's start from the beginning and go along key organizational research publications. The first studies of gender inequality were conducted before the concept of gender emerged. One of the key publications that should be mentioned here is Men and Women of the Corporation. So Kanter in 1977 described the differences between men and women in organizations. Feminist researchers then developed the concept gender to describe the social pattern of inequality, differences, and subordination with its individual and structural aspects. In 1919, Joan Aker published Hierarchies, Jobs, Bodies, a theory of gendered organizations. And this theory of gendered organizations explores the hidden gendered logic of organizations. So first it was the gendered individuals, and then it was a gendered logic. Until today, very often the view that organizations are neutral persists, also in organizational research and in practice also. At best, it is acknowledged that there are gendered individuals in the neutral container organization. This is what Callas et al. Call gender in organization perspective. So there is a neutral container in which gendered individuals act. But there is also diverse research on gender as a result or a byproduct of organizational processes. Callas et al. Call this, let's say, more advanced perspective, gendering organizations. Aker, who had published Hierarchies, Jobs, Bodies in 1990, in 2006 published Inequality Regimes, Gender, Class, and Race in Organizations. This is definitely more in an intersectional perspective on gender-related inequalities in organizations. So briefly on gender, a few words, and then about diversity in a moment, before I come to the possible connections between gender and diversity. In media coverage, and sometimes in organizational discourses, discussions, gender is often used when it comes to women and when we actually talk about women. Hence, here the reminder, men also have a gender. And when it comes to gender identity, the reference to women and men falls short anyway. Since 2018, persons with a non-binary gender identity in Germany have the right to the third option. This means the possibility to choose the gender entry diverse and the civil status register in addition to men and women. The German Constitutional Court has thus confirmed that there are more than two genders and called on the legislature to recognize this under public law. By creating the category diverse, gender diversity also becomes institutionally visible. So perhaps when we talk about gender, we may also be talking about diversity as well. Now briefly on diversity. This is roughly what Google image search for diversity looks like. Not only is it colorful, but it also, to me, looks suspiciously like an ideal, colorful world facade. But now let's take a closer look at diversity. Diversity is not a clear or a simple concept. There is often criticism of the economic orientation of diversity. Diversity is a bit like the neoliberal pariah in the family. The criticism ranges between falling and sinking into the neoliberal swamp and falling into the wasteland of total critique. Criticism is also directed at the lack of a theoretical foundation and at the fact that diversity is essentializing. That means diversity dimensions are not considered as constructs, but rather than as human characteristics. And diversity is individualizing because structural problems are ignored. This criticism that should be taken really seriously. And I myself would feel very, very uncomfortable if structural problems were ignored. But in my opinion, this does not have to be the case with diversity. When it comes to the lacking of theoretical foundation, we also have to be a bit careful to not confound diversity research and diversity management. However, diversity can be something like a rhetorical door opener. In times of internationalization of research organizations, diversity comes across as quite relaxed and promising. And it promises the fulfillment of benefit expectations, which is important for research organizations, which are also subject to economization nowadays. The door opener function is also important because gender is not so well regarded these days. I mentioned earlier that it is often pretended that everything has been achieved, or that the demand for the dismantling of structural inequalities is the outdated demand of gender-minded women from the past. In defense of diversity, it could also be said that in the US literature, two routes of diversity movements are given. One is the demographic and economic changes of the 1980s and 1990s, but also the social movements of the 1950s to 1970s and the associated groundbreaking legislative success and considerable critical potential are given. But be aware, the Diversity Charter, Charta der Vielfalt, states in its 10-year anniversary report, resistance to diversity management is manageable. However, those who are more committed to diversity management experience more resistance. And it is certainly right to remain critical and to be careful and not to build diversity legitimation facades, but to tackle the problems and to conduct the negotiations that lie behind them. It is always about power, resources, and interests. Power, resources, and interests, always. I'm very much a business economist, but I'm not at all impressed by colorful facades. But in times when gender has become a fighting term in the public debate, a demon, the evil, it is probably especially useful to forge strategic gender and diversity alliances. But I'm here getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the connections first. So which are the possible connections? Fundamentally, the notion underlying the pair metaphors that gender and diversity are separate concepts that can be rejected or sought to be combined must be challenged. The connection is there. It has always been there. Gender is seen as a central category in diversity concepts, and gender is also about gender diversity and other kinds of diversity. And important, gender is a central criterion when it comes to discrimination. But on the one hand, it is not the only one. And on the other hand, it is sometimes overlaid by other criteria. And when it comes to naming, don't be fooled. Don't say it's not important how we name our policies. There is a lot of stake when it comes to naming. The choice of marriage and family names is a good example. Only 6% of couples take the wife's name after marriage. And this despite the fact that it has been possible since 1994. There obviously is something important about names. But let's look at the possible connections. Firstly, there is diversity under the umbrella of gender. So multiple discrimination in the sense of intersectionality can be addressed when we understand diversity under the umbrella of gender. It is not blanketly about the women and the men, but about different identities, multiple patterns of exclusion, as well as commonalities of women and men in the sense of social constructs can be taken in consideration. And there are no concept changes. It's not something new again. Yeah, gender remains privileged, which may have justification given decades of struggle, especially because there are many well-established policies on gender. The problem is, even though diversity is considered, it doesn't become visible under the label of gender. Secondly, there is gender under the diversity umbrella. There might be a simplified acceptance. This might simplify acceptance problems that gender still has. As I said, it can be like a door opener or a Trojan horse, but unfortunately, this also creates new acceptance problems because it comes along as too businesslike. Gender under the diversity umbrella allows analysis without prioritizing a category, which is good because then only the actual results show us which relevance should be given to which category. And we can also direct the view to the potentials in the sense of diversity management. But there are, of course, several problems. Firstly, there is the danger of marginalization of gender. However, the danger of marginalization exists even without diversity, we have to say. Currently, gender studies and gender equality are defamed from the right. Gender researchers and gender equality actors are vilified and threatened on the internet, and the AfD even wants to abolish gender studies. Secondly, the critical or emancipatorial potential may get lost, but even under the umbrella of diversity, critical thinking and action can be taken if it is seen as an anti-discrimination approach. And gender can also be used in a way in which the critical potential gets lost. Thirdly, an increased complexity has to be handled. All this complexity is being reduced, which is problematic too. In this case, gender studies or gender equality could ultimately being run as a section of diversity studies or diversity policies. And if gender would be treated as a section of diversity studies or policies, then research and practice on other categories is being handled separately from one another. And so the idea of intersectionality gets lost. Thirdly, there is gender and diversity. This would be like a dual strategy in the sense of gender mainstreaming. That means gender as a category would be handled exclusively. So there is a gender perspective in relation to all other diversity categories, and all other diversity dimensions would be seen through a gender lens. The double name signals connection of the concepts and puts an emphasis on the historical development. But there are also downsides to this. Two concepts could be perceived as too complex, and diversity could possibly be a bit neglected. So now what? In organizations, the decision is very often not about concepts. It's rather a pragmatic decision or a response to something that might be called management fashions, and thus actually is an adaptation to the field in which an organization operates. And I'm going to have to talk about business aspects once again, sorry. When it comes to negotiating how gender and diversity can be combined, few would openly admit it, but as a business economist, I have to point out, it is first and foremost a question of resources. Yes, unfortunately. It's also a bit about legal aspects. First of all, the legal aspects. Gender is very well protected by law. Equality of the sexes and is anchored in the Constitution and the General Equal Treatment Act, in higher education laws of the federal states, and many other laws. National standards are often developed in line with EU requirements and then broken down into the individual areas of law. In the case of diversity, the situation is a bit different. Individual aspects, that means diversity dimensions, are anchored in laws, yes, but diversity as a complete package has so far been rather absent. In state anti-discrimination laws and higher education laws, it is now slowly starting to change. Berlin has just passed a new higher education law that reflects this. So now to the more complicated point, resources. As a business economist, I can assure you that one thing is always true: resources are scarce. Scarcity of resources means that people with gender concerns are competing with resources with people with diversity concerns. At first, many of these people would say, no, it's not like that. It doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to compete. But if it's a question of not filling a position in the field of diversity, of gender equality, because a position is also to be filled in the field of diversity, then, well, it looks a bit different. Then resource scarcity really has a concrete impact on the day-to-day work. So what can I share with you for the connection between gender and diversity? First, this: as it is often the case, there is no one best way, unfortunately. The statement is always not so well received, I know, but the contexts are different and recipe solutions are just usually under-complex. In the sense of nightmare or dream team, the possible connection could be called a marriage of convenience or a strategic alliance that combines forces. Combining forces very often is a very good idea. What else? In my view, there is no way around the connection, no way. Dismantling discrimination and exclusion is absolutely necessary. And this strategic alliance, linking up with previous equality policy concepts, is not a bad choice, but a very good one, because these concepts are mostly well tested. And setting priorities is always possible and makes sense. And finally, I would like to make a clear plea for preserving the critical potential and the anti-discrimination approach. This can also be done by talking about diversity policies. We have already had the name thing. Names are not unimportant. So don't say diversity management, say diversity policies. And then setting up such policies which can preserve the critical potential makes clear that it is a matter of political negotiation processes, which we cannot avoid because the reduction of discrimination is necessary. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Here we are today. We had to record a day early, but we're still very, very happy to have Dr. Emilia Roig with us today. So thank you so much for your time. We very much appreciate it. The topic of intersectionality is really a cross-cutting topic, and we're very happy to have you. So I will start off with a little introduction. Dr. Emilia Roig is the author of the book Why We Matter and the founder of the executive director of the Center for Intersectional Justice, a Berlin-based organization combating intersecting forms of inequality and discrimination in Europe. She's a faculty member of the Social Justice Study Abroad program of DePaul University of Chicago and has taught graduate and postgraduate courses on intersectionality theory, postcolonial studies, critical race theory, and international and European law. From 2007 to 2010, she worked extensively on human rights issues at the International Labour Organization in Tanzania and Uganda, at the German Agency for International Cooperation, the GIZ, in Cambodia, and the Amnesty International in Germany. She also holds a PhD in political science, a Master of Public Policy, and an MBA from the Humboldt University of Berlin, the Hertie School of Governance, and Jean Moulin University of Lyon. She is a jury member of the German Nonfiction Book Prize of 2020 and was also in the jury of the 25 Women Award of Edition F in 2019. She was appointed an external expert at the European Commission in 2019, and she was also named an Ashoka Fellow in 2020. So thank you very much. We certainly have the pleasure of welcoming a very distinguished person here today. And so thank you so much for your time, Dr. Roig. So I guess we can start off by a bit of explanation about our audience. We have quite a heterogeneous audience in terms of everyone's background knowledge regarding diversity. So would you care to explain to us a little bit about the concept of intersectionality, please?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I would start by saying that intersectionality cannot be separated from the word oppression, right? So oppression is often a word that we shy away from, a word that we consider to be too loaded and too negative. And at the same time, it's a word that we really need to understand in order to fully grasp what intersectionality is about. Oppression is a system, a societal system, which establishes differences between people, but not only differences by saying, you know, that some people are different, but also classifies and hierarchizes people. And it's a century-long system that establishes this hierarchy along the lines of gender, of race, of ethnicity, religion, of physical traits such as, and impairments such as disability, sexual orientation. And so that's why it's important to know that intersectionality is about dismantling these hierarchies, and it's about dismantling the categories and understanding them as constructs, right? It's about understanding all these categories, not as natural categories that are ingrained in nature, but more as categories that have been fixed by humans and cast as categories that are attached to certain qualities, right? So for example, according to this hierarchy, if we look at men and women, the women, or the category man has been attached to rationality, to assertiveness, to aggressivity as well. And so these are shown, or lack of emotions, and these characteristics are attached to men as natural traits. The other side of the coin is to see women as naturally caring, as naturally less competitive, less apt at leading, as more irrational, more emotional. And naturalizing these differences allows us to justify and to accept inequalities. For example, by saying, because women are naturally more caring and nurturing, they should, by nature, be more in the home. And because they are less competitive and less rational, it would be irresponsible to put them in positions of power. So I'm a bit exaggerating here, but only slightly, because this discourse is the underpinning discourse about gender differences and why men and women ought to occupy certain spheres in society. And at the same time, we have the same with race, right? It means that scientific racism, well into the 20th century, culminating with the Shoah in Europe, has constructed the human superiority and human norm against whiteness. And whiteness was representative for beauty, for intelligence, for rationality again, for trust, and for the superior culture, superior languages, superior taste, right? And then the other side of the coin is to have constructed Blackness as less intelligent, less beautiful, less rational, more dangerous, and more, more physically strong and closest to animals, right? And so this has justified as well slavery. It has justified the exploitation of Black people, and not only Black people, but also in the racial hierarchy, other groups. And so intersectionality, to come back to your question finally, is really about understanding that gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, all these different aspects and all these different axes that are playing into this hierarchy are not isolated from each other, but play a role. It means that it's a different experience and different attributes are attached to, let's say, a Black woman and to a white woman. That it's, a different experience that you make of the world if you're disabled and poor, or if you're disabled from a, upper middle class background, right? It doesn't change anything about the disability, but it will impact on how you go through the world with this disability. So it's really all about combining these different axes of oppression and understanding that combating oppression requires that we do not look at these different axes as separate from each other.
Thank you so much for this answer that really gave a background how stereotypes and hierarchies work hand in hand and can't be separated from one another. And so if you could go a little bit into then why and how exactly intersectionality matters with concrete examples, so people can really get a feel of what this concept is all about.
Yes, sure. So I will start with the concept and how it came to being. So the concept of intersectionality was, or at least the name intersectionality was coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a renowned lawyer who is teaching at Columbia University in New York City and also in UCLA. And she coined the term intersectionality because she was referring to a case with General Motors where there were massive layoffs of Black women in the company. And then when they were trying to file for discrimination on the grounds of gender, it was said to them, well, no, it is not discrimination on the basis of gender because look, white women in the company were not laid off. And so when they tried to file against discrimination on the ground of gender, of race, sorry, then the same argument was brought forward saying, well, in the same case, Black men were not discriminated against and were not laid off. So it means that they were falling through the cracks of anti-discrimination law and found themselves as a crossroads. So hence the term intersectionality, right? So they were coming at the intersection of gender discrimination and racial discrimination. And so this term was really trying to bring to attention the fact that we are not only impacted by one aspect of our identities, but more aspects of our identities, especially for Black women in this case. Before Kimberly Crenshaw, other people, other experts and activists and writers, African-American women, including bell hooks, including Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, had conceptualized intersectionality without naming the term. And essentially what it was about was to say the experience of Black women is a very specific one that needs our attention. Sojourner Truth, who was a prominent figure of the abolitionist movement in the 19th century, pronounced a speech which was called "Ain't I a Woman?" And she really called to attention to the fact that as a woman, she was neither welcome in the feminist movement, which was primarily led by white women, and she was also not welcome in the abolitionist movement, which was primarily led by men. And it's not about being welcome, but it's more about having a space and being able to fully represent those movements as a Black woman. And so now to give you a contemporary example of intersectionality, I can name the example of the hijab, for example, here in Europe, where we see that women with a hijab, who are discriminated against, let's say on the labor market, are, if they advance the ground of discrimination on the basis of religion, it cannot be recognized because men or Muslim men in the same situation do not experience this discrimination because they are not wearing the hijab, and the whole discrimination is based on the hijab. And if the discrimination is on the basis of gender, it's also not recognized because other women, even if they're Muslim women but not wearing the hijab, will not face the same type of discrimination. So again, they find themselves at the crossroads of discrimination on the basis of gender and religion/ethnicity. And so that's why intersectionality, so now we saw how important it is to really conceptualize discrimination from an intersectional standpoint. But now I'm going to give you another example. And this example shows you how we need to adopt a trickle-up approach. I'm going to be more clear about this. Let's imagine that now we have different axes of discrimination that affect each individual. An intersectional approach means that we're going to look at a hypothetical person who would combine all grounds of discrimination. So this person would be Black, a trans person, working class, disabled, etc., you name it. And it's not really about that person because it wouldn't be so efficient. Statistically speaking, there are very, very few of these people, right, who combine all grounds of disadvantage and discrimination. So instead, it's looking at, okay, if we have this hypothetical case, let's look at what systems affect this person. Let's look at what systems affect this person and what we can do to make sure that she has access to healthcare, that she has access to housing, that she feels respected on the street, that if she calls the police, she will be respected and not harassed, making sure that she has political voice, etc., etc. And in order for this to happen, we will need to combat the systems which are affecting her, namely homophobia, ableism, racism, patriarchy, etc. Right? And if we do that, then we can make sure that all the people in the other categories, so let's say that all trans people, all disabled people, all women, all LGBTQI people, irrespective of how many grounds of discrimination they face, will benefit from this approach. So we go from a trickle down approach to a trickle up approach, because today we are following a trickle down approach, right? It means that, for example, on the if we speak about gender discrimination, the answer that is mostly brought forward is to say we need to ensure that women at the top crack the glass ceiling, go even further, and then automatically will have a trickle down effect on other women. Has it worked in the past? No, not really. Has it had positive impacts? Yes, some of them, but statistically speaking, not enough. because it can be positive in terms of having role models in positions of power. It can be positive in terms of having interest brought to such spheres. But when it comes to the structures of society, to the systems, to the policies which really affect the largest number of women, it will not work. So that's why the trickle-down approach needs to be replaced by a trickle-up approach. And this is what intersectionality is about. And Kimberly Crenshaw, the inventor of the term, actually said a quote that I find quite telling in this respect. And she says, intersectionality can reach everyone on the planet. And essentially, I think this is what she meant.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning Kimberly Crenshaw. I was also going to mention her. And I was wondering, with respect to that, the concept originated in the US and was coined by an American woman. So how does the concept of intersectionality differ within the German context also, as opposed to maybe the US context? And even, have you noticed any particularities within the many different places you have had the pleasure of living in internationally also? Because obviously, as we know from your CV, you've also lived in Uganda and other places. So I'd be interested how the concept and the application of the concept would differ.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So yeah, I think intersectionality is a lot of things. It's a political project, for justice and equality and fairness. It's also a theoretical concept, and it's a framework. It's a policy and theoretical framework that we can apply to every situation in the world, right? To every situation of inequality and oppression and discrimination. So it means that the concept that is not anchored in any particular context, even though it originated from the United States. Right. So the example that I'm giving you with Black women and white women and Black men is not something that can be applied to Cambodia, for example, right? Or to Peru, even though, yes, it could be, Peru less, but Brazil, it could be applied to Brazil. And so it's about taking the framework and making sure that it can be adapted to the specific context. And what I see here with Europe and the fact that intersectionality is a term that has experienced such an exponential growth here in the European context, where more and more people are interested in the concept and understand the benefits it represents. And at the same time, we see that there have been a lot of misunderstandings and misappropriations of the concept in the European context. And it has mostly to do with the discomfort of Europe with the category race. Race is a very contentious category in the European context, and mostly it is just cast as a category that belongs to the past, or so a distant past or a distant geographical area, which is deemed to be unique in its characteristics, meaning the US. But racial categories and race as a concept is a global concept. And actually it originated in Europe, right? So the birth of the concept of race is Europe, and it has been perpetuated by Europe too. It means that scientific racism, the time of the philosophers of the Enlightenment, have largely contributed to the creation of this category. And so that's why it's important to underline the fact that race as a concept is not attached to a specific country. It means that even in Senegal, I mentioned Cambodia earlier, I could just mention it again, or Peru, that it's applied there. It means that even if there's no sizable white population group in these countries, the white norm, or at least the reference to whiteness as the superior norm, will always be present. So it means that when white people arrive in Senegal or in Peru or in Cambodia, automatically they will be surrounded by privileges because of their skin color. And so also within these countries, there will also be a certain admiration for whiteness that has been created by this constructed superiority. And it's very much linked as well too, or at least one of the symptoms is the bleaching creams for the skin, or colorism, meaning that people who have lighter skin tend to have tend to have higher status and enjoy more privileges in society, more access, etc.
Yeah, no, that really resonates with me, what you said. I actually have a little anecdote about the admiration for, wrongful admiration for whiteness in other countries. I lived in Bolivia and I worked for this NGO, and we were invited to the Organization of American States to their conference, which happened to be in Bolivia that year. They were hosting. And something happened, or our invitations got lost, even though we signed up with our organization. And even though I didn't even have a ticket for the event, not only was I let into this high level event, I was not sat with the public without me even saying anything. I was sat with all the ambassadors. For no reason, I was a 20-something-year-old, and the only reason I could come up with was the skin color, which was quite shocking to me, to be honest. So yeah, thank you for touching upon that. And what you just said also raised the question for me. The U.S. and the German difference, for example, they deal very differently with the ethnic background or any diversity information. And so in terms of data collection, I'd be interested, just to throw something in here, how you feel which would be the better approach, because the US, they're more likely to collect data on all kinds of different diversity markers. And the German government tends to be more cautious and say, we don't want to raise such data, or we're careful with collecting such data. So what are the pros and cons of both approaches, and do you feel that one would be leading to better results?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing the anecdote, and also for the question. So data collection is an important instrument. So it means that it's an instrument. It makes it easier for us to combat discrimination and to increase diversity, but it's also not a prerequisite. It means that diversity can still be promoted without data if we have to. Of course, I'm a proponent of collecting data. I understand Germany's reluctance to collecting data because of the very difficult relationship to the past, and also the fact that in the past, the collection of such data has led to genocide, right? So there's very well-grounded reasons to refuse it. But we have to also know that collecting such data would be done in a very different way. It would be anonymized. The reason for collecting this data would be very transparent. There would be no way to trace back the name of the person with a possible ethnicity or sexual orientation or any other marker of difference. And then it would be voluntary, and it would be self-definition. So it wouldn't be that people from the outside, let's say a company says, okay, you are Black and you are white, but people self-define and say, I identify as white or I identify as Black, which is a very different thing, right? At the same time, in these times that are highly polarized and where there is the menace of far-right extremism, and we could be on a very slippery slope. And so having such data could be detrimental to the fight against injustice if they are instrumentalized and if they are manipulated. And so the manipulation of such data could be, let's say, okay, we do such a survey in prisons to know who is in prison currently. And then obviously, because the data is currently looking this way, there would be a vast majority of foreigners, of people of color, Black people, Turkish people, Muslim people in prisons. And detached from the sociological and political explanation for this overrepresentation, it could be very simplified and said, if the majority of the people sitting in prison are from such backgrounds, it means that they are by nature almost genetically predisposed to crime, which has been used in the past. So it means that statistics, it's very important to always link them with an analysis that is grounded in sociology, and an analysis that is also grounded in, a very peculiar, a very founded and and serious sociological and political analysis, right? So it means that if we wanted to explain the overrepresentation of people of color in prisons, then we have to also look at the reasons which drive this overrepresentation, meaning economic deprivation, which is the main reason. It means that over 80%, over 85% of the people who are currently incarcerated here in Germany, but also worldwide, are predominantly poor people who are in prisons because they couldn't pay off their debt, because they couldn't pay their tickets. And so it means that they have to serve time, right? So there's a very strong class filter in the prison system. Another reason for this is that racial profiling in law enforcement and institutional discrimination in the justice system leads to higher rates of incarcerations for people of color for the same offenses. It means that a lot of studies have been conducted showing that if we have the exact same crime committed by two different people, one white person and one black person, the sentence and the punishment that the black person receive and the serving time will be much higher than the time served by the white person, if at all. It means that in some cases, for the same crime, a white person will not be incarcerated and a black person will be incarcerated. And we can transfer those data to, you know, here in Germany, Turkish people, Arabic people, and white people. So added to this, there's also racial profiling by the police, meaning that, and Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the most important major human rights organizations have conducted research on racial profiling in the police here in Germany and Europe, and have proven that the practice of primarily controlling Black people, Arabic people, people of color is widespread and is even taught in the police force, which leads to, of course, if you predominantly, if let's say 70%, I'm just making up statistics here to just show you the relation, but if 70% of the people you control are Black and people of color, then of course they will be overrepresented in the justice system and in prisons, right? So there are, and here I'm just like mentioning the major three reasons, but there's a host of different reasons that also lead to the overrepresentation of Black and brown people in prisons. And so that's why statistics can be misinterpreted, they can be manipulated and instrumentalized. And at the same time, they are necessary in order to combat discrimination. If we didn't have statistics for men and women, how would we be able to say, there is a problem here because the gender pay gap is such and such percent, or there is a problem here because there is an overrepresentation of men in the spheres of power? We would not be able to say that, and we would be left with very few means to combat this gender discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess given that the Leibniz community is 96 research institutions, is there anything particular also about the academic context when it comes to the concept of intersectionality? Are certain groups within academia potentially more vulnerable than others, or less likely to be hired, or whatever the hurdles may be? But also, of course, let's not just talk about challenges, but of course the opportunities that lie within. Are there ways to mitigate these challenges? Is there anything specific about the academic context that we should be aware of when formulating and discussing in our groups that we did already today and we're doing tomorrow also? What should we pay attention to? Okay.
We should pay attention to the fact that the academia is a very oppressive terrain. And I just like weight my words. I come from the academia. I've been engaged in the French and German academia. And what I can say is that there's so much work that still needs to be done. And why is that? It has historical roots. It means that for a very long time, until very recently, if we look, in relative terms, academia was an exclusively male and white environment. It means that knowledge was attributed to white men and white elderly men. And that's quite important because our subconscious has also associated knowledge and wisdom and competence, skillfulness with whiteness and with masculinity. So it means that, and also it was justified, or at least the exclusion of women from academic spheres was justified by biology, right? So I talked earlier about the naturalization of differences and how dangerous it is to do this. there was a theory until the end of the 19th century, which actually said women, so the theory, I'm not really sure about the date, but it's quite recent, actually, if we look in terms of relative terms. The theory of the energy in the body. And the theory said we have a certain amount of energy in the body, and so that's why we should be careful about how we use it. And based on this theory, women were kept excluded from spheres of power because it was said if they go into activities that require the energy in the body to move to their brains, it will be at the expense of their wombs, and their role in society is to be childbearers, right? So it was justified by biology, the exclusion of women from spheres of power, which are academia and politics, media, banks, everything that is intellectual and in our society enjoys a very high status, high pay, high prestige, etc. So there is a historical reason why today this type of discrimination continues to be perpetuated. And here, if I extend it to other types of people, such as people with disabilities, disabled people are routinely and systematically excluded from the academia. Because irrespective of whether the disability is a physical disability or a mental disability, it means that disability as a whole has been constructed as a badge of inferiority for people with disabilities, right? It means as well, so it's not only women who have been excluded, it's also Black people and people of color, indigenous people, colonized people who were deemed to be less intelligent. And so, of course, this continues to impact our view of the world and our subconscious, because we continue to associate knowledge with and competence and intelligence with whiteness and with masculinity. And we need to recognize it if we want to combat it at university. We need to recognize that automatically women and people of color, people with disabilities are faced with discrimination because of those implicit biases. If a woman applies for a grant, the jury is going to be much more hard on her because she will need to prove herself. And the need to prove yourself when you're not automatically met with a positive prejudice, a positive stereotype of being intelligent and being, belonging to this sphere, belonging to the academia. It means that it results in discrimination, even if it's not intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. And also what you just said brought up something that I received an email just last week. I was being asked about a panel and how it was looking on diversity. And of course, I said, well, we have to do a little better. And I gave my reasons for it because it was an all white panel, even though it had some women in it. But even there, we weren't quite where we needed to be. And so I got a response email from a colleague, basically having done a screenshot from a website about what academic excellence is. And I got the email that basically diversity is not a criteria for us, only excellence is. And so how do you deal, I would be very interested because I find it very frustrating. How do you deal with this, that somehow there is, somehow it's often framed that this is in opposition to one another, when clearly to me, my understanding is that it goes hand in hand. How do we deal with this?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing this example. So I've been hired by a major university trying to include more diversity. And when I was speaking with the dean, he said to me, look, it's either diversity or excellence. So are we ready to just give up excellence for diversity? And so this was extremely telling. And I'm thinking, doesn't he realize what he is implying by this, right? Because it is a very strong statement to make, right? It means that we associate not only implicitly, but very willingly and consciously and intentionally excellence with whiteness and with masculinity, right? If it means that becoming more diverse in terms of gender and ethnicity and race means that excellence will not be guaranteed, then it tells a lot about the self-perception of the people who consider themselves excellent. So it tells the extent of the problem, because we still have a very racialized and gendered image of excellence. And it's all about deconstructing this, because what we have seen as excellence so far is biased. And this bias needs to be addressed. This bias needs to be addressed. It needs to be deconstructed. We need to understand that our society has a very, or at least a very, or believes in universalism, believes in neutrality, objectivity. And these are also norms that need to be deconstructed. So I speak about it at length in my book. I just want to show it very briefly for those who speak German. So it's called Why We Matter, The End of Oppression. And I have a long chapter about science, about knowledge, about universities and discrimination in higher education. And I speak exactly about this, about the deconstruction of the universal, objective, neutral norm, which is nothing less than a particularism, a particular standpoint that has been erected as the universal. And so that's why I think it's very easy as well to counteract this claim by saying, okay, so if excellence, if here on this panel, all people are white and we're looking for excellence, does it mean that it has something genetic to it? And then that's a trap that they're easily going to fall in, because there's no exit to this. How do you want to explain that, for example, the most powerful people on earth are white males that are above 40? How do you want to explain this? Like, does it have something genetic to it? And so if we move to the genetic explanation, this is how we see that there's only one step to coming to a genocide, because these are the same logical explanations. This is the same logic, and we need to move away from this. We need to have an understanding of excellence. We need to have an understanding of intelligence and of what knowledge is that is more inclusive, that is not as oppressive, and that has stayed stuck in the past, right? Because the world evolves, luckily.
Yeah, I think that also raises the question, who defines what excellence is? And if it's just one particular group, then of course, it is clear that excellence is kind of defined in regards to that person. Or that group, I should say. So I guess I will finish with one last question, and that would be, do you have any recommendations for our 96 institutes and as well the Leibniz community as a whole in order to address these challenges and opportunities, of course, related to diversity and intersectionality in particular also? Because this is obviously the whole point of our conference, is to be able to make some recommendations to the institutes, but also specifically for the Leibniz community and how we can address this better.
So I will say one thing, and that's my first and most important recommendation. It's to no longer deny that there is a problem, to no longer deny that oppression does exist, to no longer deny that sexism, racism, and all forms of discrimination are facts. And we have been, and that's the thing, that's the problem, because oppression also relies on gaslighting. And gaslighting is a process through which we say, no, actually, that's not really an issue. And what we see is that most of the conversation about DEI, about anti-discrimination, about anti-oppression is whether or not these problems are actual problems. Is there still racism? Can we still speak about racism? Isn't it something else? Like, haven't we overcome racism? What about sexism? Is sexism really a thing? And so that's always this constant questioning about whether or not oppression does in fact exist. And this negationism is leading to an absolute incapacity to deal with those issues, because we are stuck in the phase of actually debating whether or not it's true. And this is really a major impediment to change. This resistance of not wanting to see it comes from, I believe in the good in human beings. So I believe that it's not necessarily coming from a bad intent, but there's this resistance to know, like, don't tell me that the world as I know it might have been wrong in some respects. And so that's why I feel like we need to move away from this. And once we realize, we will be able to be efficient as we've never been before. So that's the first and most important step. And I think we need to just like take a moment, breathe, and know, okay, this is our task right now as a collective group to realize and recognize this is an issue. It's not up for debate whether discrimination exists or not. It's not up for debate because we have figures, we have historical accounts, we have so much proof, and it seems to never be enough. And now is the time to just be, you know, looking ahead and knowing, okay, we have a task and it's a collective task. And most importantly, all of us will benefit from the dismantlement of oppression. It's not going to be a zero-sum game where only Black and people of color and women and other marginalized groups win. It's not, you know, the liberation of some people doesn't mean the oppression of others. You know, more equality for some people doesn't mean injustice for others. So it's really a win-win situation, and we need to change our view on those issues so that men and white people and straight people and people without disabilities are not threatened by these social justice movements, but more invigorated and knowing, you know, we're a unique fabric. We're only a group, we're all connected to each other. So as long as some people will not be thriving in our society, it will be detrimental to all of us. So yeah, no one will be free until all of us are free. I don't know who said that, but it's a well-known quote, and I think it ends very well this conversation.
Yes, there are so many more questions. I could sit here for another 2 hours with you. Unfortunately, we don't have time, and we also need to move on with our discussion tables after this. But yeah, thank you so much from all of us for spending the time with us and accommodating us even under difficult circumstances. And thank you so much for your time here. And maybe I guess one more thing that we couldn't address here, but I'd also be very interested in kind of coping strategies for some of these internalized views that we also have on us, and you know, that kind of strengthens our inner imposter syndrome that we also need to kind of deal with our inner attitude ourselves. You know,
that would be the occasion. This is exactly what I do in workshops as well, but that's yeah.
Yes.
But yes,
there goes the plug. So maybe hopefully for our next Leibniz Diversity Conference, we can have you back for a workshop on how to deal with our inner demons when it comes to doubting ourselves also within that bigger scheme. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. And yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.